So I'd like to welcome everybody to the EO conversation about China. Listen, I know you guys are all having some interesting business times. There's not one person that I know on the planet that has not been affected by this crisis, and which led me to think, well, how do we handle this crisis together? What could we do? What could we learn? And I believe that there's a little time machine that could maybe give us an opportunity to peer into the future and see what has happened in China. And there's a good friend of mine that I've known for a while that has some experience, and I did a call with him yesterday, and he agreed to get on this call and kind of share his experiences with China and kind of tell us what is going on right now there. And so I'd like to introduce John Lombard. How are you doing, John?
Very good, thank you.
Excellent.
Glad to be
Excellent. Here. Everybody hear John okay? All right, great. So what I'd like to do is start off with a couple of questions here. Do you mind, John, just giving your experience around China up to this point and kind of your background?
Yeah, I'll try to do it as quickly as possible because there's a lot there. But I went to China in 1993, straight out of university. In fact, pretty much my entire adult life, post-university life, has been in China. I lived in China from 1993 until last year when I returned back to Canada. So 25 years, quarter of a century spent in China. 1993, that was 4 years after the Tiananmen Square massacre. So China was still a very, very closed country, very little news in the outside world what was going on. And I was there for the entire transformation from that to what China is today. So it was really an amazing experience. Went there originally as an English teacher, teaching in university. Then around 1996 is when China started opening up and all the foreign companies started flooding into China. And my university degree is in cross-cultural studies. So here I was at a degree in culture. I had several years experience in China and had all these foreign companies coming in with foreign managers who were absolutely clueless about how to work in the Chinese culture. So I started freelancing as a consultant for helping them to understand culture. That proved so popular that it turned into, by 2000, myself and a Taiwanese partner had opened up our own company doing that full time. So that was how I kind of got transitioned from teaching to business. Then as time went on, I got involved in several other businesses in China. I opened up a total of 4 companies there. 3 were successful. 1 was a miserable failure. Probably my other biggest one, and rather relevant to this discussion, is I also had a sourcing company. So anybody who wanted to buy products from China or wanted to have a particular product made in China, they could contact us. We'd find the company, negotiate the contract. Before you made payment for shipment, we would inspect it to make sure that it was what you'd actually paid for, everything like that. So, and now, like I said, I've been back in Canada for a little over a year, came back in January of 2019, and still doing the cultural thing, but with a slightly different emphasis. Now I do cultural diversity consulting for corporations. So basically any medium or large size company that in their North American offices, they have a lot of different cultures working together in the same office, then I'll go in and help them to do training to improve teamwork, communication, everything like that to help improve the cultural understanding. So
hey, John, that's great. I appreciate that description. So let's kind of start off. Can you explain a little bit about how capitalism works in a communist country like China?
Yeah, don't know how many of your people are actually familiar with China, have been there, but first of all, like when people call China a communist country, it is no longer a communist country by any standard. The ruling party still bears the name of Communist Party, but they've dropped pretty well every major communist philosophy. You have hardcore capitalists who are members of the Communist Party. They are now a socialist dictatorship. So, you know, but on a regular basis, as far as the people go, Chinese people are among the most capitalist people on the planet. Yeah, so there's massive opportunities. There are still sectors of the Chinese economy that are fully controlled by the government, financial, natural resources, things like that. But any areas, and there are a lot that have been opened up to the general public, um, it's the Wild West. There are massive opportunities. The Chinese people are very, very capitalist. So it's a very unique, very interesting environment to work in.
Excellent. Hey, John, I appreciate that. So if you don't mind taking us back when the first moment that rumors about the virus started and to the response with the government in the shutdown, if you could just tell that short story for a bit and how that affected things in China and how the people responded.
Yeah. Well, essentially, they discovered the virus, discovered something was happening there, and they didn't go public with it immediately. Which there's obviously been quite a bit of criticism leveled that way. There, I think part of the reason for that, there have actually been several other instances where potential infections have started to break out. The Chinese government has been aware of them, but they never went anywhere. So the government was kind of, well, why should we be informing people and scaring people when we don't even know if there's anything serious there? So and anyway, whether it obviously in retrospect was not a good decision, but once it did go public, people were aware of it. Then the Chinese government kind of went in the opposite direction. I was in China for the whole SARS thing, and both instances they were slow to take action. But the difference this time is once they did take action, it was far more rapid, far more comprehensive than it was during SARS. Completely shutting down Wuhan, quarantining other areas that you had. Like they literally this also happened at probably the worst possible time, just before the Chinese New Year. And Chinese New Year in China, it's the biggest national holiday. It's like our Christmas. Everybody returns home. There are over 600 million people traveling on trains across the country. So picture an epidemic where you have 600 million people traveling in closely packed trains all over the country. The government recognized this, so they immediately first they extended the Chinese New Year, gave another week's holiday to create more of a buffer. They shut down every major tourist area, Disneyland, Shanghai Disney, everything, every tourist area was shut down, which meant massive economic impact for the country. This is one of the major tourist seasons. But yeah, they took very, very, again, China tends to be either do nothing or go the opposite extreme and do everything possible. So yeah, that was pretty much the reaction.
Was the speed of the shutdown for areas affected, did it happen as rapidly? I remember, 7 days ago, I was driving to Florida, and from that moment, from Friday to today, I'm astounded how fast everything rapidly deteriorated for my business.
Yeah.
Was that the same experience in China?
Probably even more so. Yeah. Like Wuhan, once the government decided to shut it down, you not only had public transit shut down in and out, you had the People's Liberation Army mobilized on every road around the whole city, checking everybody going in and out, stopping all unnecessary traffic. It was, Disney was literally shut down with 1 day notice. Yeah.
So, but they had a lot more control to make sure everyone shut down versus
Exactly. That's right.
Yeah.
That's I think that's one of, I don't like to talk about dictatorships being good, but one benefit in an emergency I've seen time and time again in China is they are able to have extremely rapid uh, decision making, deployment, everything like that, because there's no discussion, there's no debate. It's just boom, do it.
Yeah. Well, during the slowdown, was there any particular business that seemed to kind of survive? Obviously, healthcare was one, but was there any kind of businesses in the purpose for this call is to uncover
Yeah.
opportunities.
Yep.
We're looking for, like, number one, there's a lot of anxiety. Anybody that's on this call watching me right now has absolutely been affected in a very negative way. And I think what we're looking for is, are there opportunities? Are there places that we need to be thinking about, or opportunities in the present, like right this moment, or when we're coming out? And
Yep.
so in the present now, like where the US is, let's imagine for a moment, we'll go back in your time machine. What businesses seem to be doing well in that crisis?
Well, during the crisis, honestly, I don't think there was any. Even when you look at the ones that would seem to be obvious, like face mask, hand sanitizer, things like that. In China, because all the factories were shut down, all the workers were home and not going back, they weren't even really able to capitalize on that. So in the midst of that crisis, I don't think there was anybody I could say that was really
So
doing.
factories weren't running
Nope.
during at all,
Well,
zero.
Chinese New Year factories don't run anyway. It's a 2-week holiday where everybody's going home, and then the government extended that, and factories still aren't up to full capacity right now. They're still kind of running on a smaller workforce, but at that time, no, there was nothing, no factories running.
Is it there not enough people working, or was there? Tell me about that.
Yeah,
Why? Yeah.
Yeah, it's just the government has actually been pushing people quite hard now to go back to work, but you got to keep in mind, like in China, the factory workers, these are the people who are all from the countryside that don't have a good education, unskilled labor. Almost all factory workers are migrant labor. They're coming from other parts of China. They travel there to work in the factories. So a significant number of them, a decent number of them, are still too scared. They're still worried, so they're still staying at home. They're not going back and going to the factories. So I've talked with some factory owners there right now, and they seem to be, most of them seem to be between 50 to 75% of the workforce has returned.
So how did how did the government help support small businesses, or any businesses for that matter, when, as soon as this happened, was there a lifeline for them to keep the doors opened? And
Not really, and I think that's where I think there's a real difference in the reaction of Chinese people and North Americans to this. Um, the Chinese culture, history, everything like that. The Chinese people, although of course they complain about the situation, about what's happening, there's also very much an idea that this is something we're all fighting together. This is a national thing. And this is a culture where they're used to suffering. Like when I went to China, 70% of the population was a peasant population. That had very, so these are people that for the majority have been familiar with privation, struggling, things like that. They tend to react to it more positively. So the government in return, like they're so I think it's much more a thing, as long as the government is perceived as being in control and the country as a whole is moving in a positive direction, the people are generally fairly supportive. Now, right now, of course, now that things are coming back, the government is pumping money into the economy to try to stimulate it. They're actively pushing everybody to be going back to work, things like that. But no,
here in
not
the
like the
United
U.S.
Yeah, here in the United States, we had this certain segment of citizen who didn't believe that this was serious, and then we have this other subset of people that are treating it seriously.
Yeah.
Do the Chinese citizens have the same kind of thing where some
They
believe?
didn't have the choice.
Okay.
China, again, like China simply banned anything more than 10 people together. If you did that, the police arrested you. They made it mandatory to wear a face mask in public. Anybody walking around in public without a face mask on would be detained by police. You just didn't have the option like you do in North America.
So, in your opinion, do you think this is a much faster progression than it was in China because of that?
Um, I think the initial part, no, it was about the same. But I think we've reached a point now where, yeah, the U.S. is starting to exceed China as far as the progression, simply because when it reached a certain point, China, the whole thing of the social distancing,
Mm-hmm.
China was able to achieve that very, very effectively, practically overnight.
Mm.
Yeah.
All right, excellent. So, how
So
long are they out of being in quarantine?
now it would be about 3 weeks.
Okay.
That yeah.
Maybe you could explain a little bit about that experience now that everyone is kind of starting to come back to work. What is a typical, one of the things that I think about, and I'll tell you why I'm asking these questions, is one of the concerns that I have is by people self-quarantining themselves. My family last Friday, my son had a fever. So to be precautious, we came back and decided not to go on vacation. We've been in our house since Friday. That's been exciting, right? Um, one of the concerns I have is consumer behavior will tend to fall into new habits now. And we're now sitting at our house. We've been at our house for a week. We've been, getting our groceries delivered. We've bought things on Amazon, like I'm sure millions of people. This is probably the best blessing for Jeff Bezos ever. But I am concerned about the transfer of habits into new
Yeah.
habits, and I'm wondering if you had seen that with China.
Oh, absolutely. I'm not there, but I'm talking with a lot of my friends, my family, everything like that about it, and it's really interesting. That now, first of all, even though the crisis right now is kind of under control, people can go out. Vast majority of Chinese are still actively self-quarantining. My family, my wife hasn't left the apartment in about a month. They will go to work, like for anything necessary, they do it. But other than that, they tend to stay at home. Now, things like restaurants, it's been interesting how they're dealing with this. Home delivery, of course, is doing very, very well. But my friends are telling me, one of my friends sent me a picture. One of the restaurants that he went to had set up like plastic sheets that went all around each table. So when you went to the restaurant, your table was protected from the other table by these hanging plastic sheets. There are restaurants apparently that are setting up virtual dining, where they have their own app. So you're at home, you have some friends at home at their home, something like that. You order from the restaurant, they'll deliver the food to both homes simultaneously, and then on your app you can be seeing each other and talking to each other as if you're having dinner together. So they're really trying to find ways to address the social distancing thing to make people feel more comfortable, but still be using them.
Mm. Now, did when this crisis started, was there people working from home, like kind of what we've done is all transitioned to working online, or was that frowned upon in China with telecommuting?
Well, telecommuting where it could be done or where it can be done was done to a certain degree. Again, when it started, you had the Chinese New Year, so you had a 3-week holiday there anyway that no businesses were running. So there was less of an issue initially. With people returning to work, where they can telecommute, yeah, they're still tending to do that. But again, the big issue is the factories, and you can't telecommute to work in a factory.
Yeah, yeah. Well, if it's been 3 weeks, so it sounds like to me that that getting people back into the swing of things to go into their normal life, they just have not decided to do that yet. Is it
Yeah, the
primarily
people.
because of? Is it primarily because it's fear or the social distancing and all that other stuff? They're just still staying hunkered down.
I think it's pretty much an attitude of it's better to be safe than to be sorry. You know,
Mm,
there is still justifiable skepticism from the people about how accurate the info the government is giving. There's, and then there's just the personally, it's better to be safe than to be sorry. Yeah, I'd prefer to be overcautious.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, every time I look at Corona statistics like I was like a sports fan now. I don't
Yeah.
know about you or anybody watching me. I'm constantly looking at how rapidly Italy is increasing. And every time I
Yeah.
look at China, it looks completely flat.
Yep.
And the data has so much inconsistencies in it that makes you question whether or not when did the data start going faulty, because it just doesn't seem right.
Well, actually, I do. This is something I've looked at a fair bit. I don't think the numbers are actually that far off. They may be not 100% accurate, but there are a number of other things that you can use to verify what the government is saying. So first would be social media, particularly the WeChat app. Almost every person in China uses WeChat. It's pretty much uncensored for the most part, um, and people have been kind of self-reporting, you know, when they're infected, when they recover, things like that. And there are people that have been looking at that, and the numbers coming from that and the numbers coming from the government are fairly similar. I've heard some people pushing conspiracy theories that, people are just being detained in internship camps or things like this, and the government's hiding it. But again, if that was happening, people would be reporting on WeChat that their family members have disappeared, been detained. That's not happening. And then the other part is the hospitals themselves. China built several emergency hospitals just for this. All those hospitals are empty now. There's no more need for them. The regular hospitals, I have friends who've gone to those hospitals, things like that, and they're well under capacity now. Lots of empty rooms. So there's lots of info there to verify the virus is not gone, but it certainly is on the decline. It's certainly well under control.
So, John, I got another question for you. So, it's funny, you can learn a lot about reading your news feed, and obviously our news feed today is a little bit scary for anybody that owns a business, anybody that has a friend or family member. I mean, everyone has got a very negative post. I'm just kind of curious, when you look through your news feed, having friends and family there, um, what's the feeling about the way things are today?
Well, in China, the feeling it's to some degree talking about themselves, but the bigger fear is actually what's happening in the rest of China. Like for factories, they're getting people back to work. Factories are starting to run again, but their target markets are all closed down, and they don't know how long they're going to be closed down for. So even if China's recovering, U.S., they now is effectively shut down. So
Yeah.
yeah, so
Yeah.
so that's really where a lot of the folks that I'm hearing is. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Is there any businesses that you have seen post the shutdown over the last 3 weeks that maybe shows up as an ad on your Facebook news feed, or you've heard of people starting to use this particular service, or anything that that could be an opportunity for someone that has a business here that could plan ahead and see forward and go, all right, I'm going to be
Well,
ready for when this.
yeah, not so much on my news feed because of course China's blocks Facebook anyway. But generally speaking, yeah, there are. And when you talk with me about this, I actually contacted several people in China to get their feedback on this question as well. First of all, anything to do with maintaining sanitary standards. Particularly anything that's a new twist. They were telling me, like, for hand sanitizers, now people are looking not just at the sanitizer itself, but the dispenser. Like, 100 different kinds of dispensers are coming out on the market. So anything that's new, that would be kind of trendy. This would probably be a short term, like 1 or 2. Long term, demand would probably drop off a little, but yeah, anything in that area. Social distancing, so particularly apps or ideas like these restaurants are doing, putting the plastic shields around them, and anything in that area is good. But the biggest thing is probably with the factories. Anybody, if they are or want to have stuff made in China, they would need to look into, there is some international shipping still being allowed. Personal travel is not allowed, but international shipping to some degree is. They should look into that and see if it's possible, because these factories are desperate for business right now. You're going to be able to get much better prices, much better terms than you would have before the crisis hit. You're going to have people that are factories that are very, very cooperative, that really want to work with you.
Do you think
Even if you're not able to ship right now, if you start manufacturing it right now and keep it in a warehouse until you can ship, something like that, you're going to have far lower prices right now.
So that's a big positive, especially if I were already buying products over there. I could
exactly
get a bit of pricing and you get a better deal on things. Yeah. Interesting. So I want to make sure I leave some room at the tail end of this for some questions. You guys may be thinking of some questions. I got one I want to share with everyone. Do your contracts there? Do your contacts there have any resemblance or anticipation for when restrictions will be lifted and when the economy will start picking up?
Well, because right now when we talk about restrictions, the majority of the restrictions that are affecting them aren't the Chinese ones. They're the North American and European ones. So, I can't really answer that question. That's really up to us, not up to them.
Okay.
Yeah.
I had another question here. If you could talk through the timeline from when the quarantine happened, the peak, and then returning. Do you know the kind of the idea what that looked like?
Yeah. Well, essentially, yeah. The start was early January, just before the Chinese New Year. The peak, which I pretty much expected, the peak came at the end of the Chinese New Year, because basically you had beginning of the Chinese New Year, everybody's traveling home. End of the new year, all those people are traveling back to wherever they are. That's when you're going to have the maximum spread of the disease, and that's pretty much when it hit its peak. After about 2 weeks after that is when you started seeing that steady decline as it got under control.
Was the public kind of saying, hey, we're ready to get back in the game and get back out there? Or was it just more or less hey, we think we've seen the worst of it and they just opened it up? What was there any defining moment that kind of pushed the government to say, open it up again?
No, I'd say it's the opposite. It's much more the people being more conservative and the government taking a role to be pushing everybody to be getting back. Business owners certainly felt that more strongly, but for employees, again, China, North America, we have this very strong debt culture with credit cards, and Chinese people generally dislike debt. They save. So even those who don't, and the government again had like very, very strict regulations as far as price gouging. A lot of areas they mandated prices on necessary material supplies, stuff like that. So I think people felt less financial urgency to get back to work. The urgency was more personal in protecting themselves.
So if I was a factory worker in China and I was forced to be home, was the factory paying that worker, or was the government paying?
No.
So was the government paying unemployment benefits for that person?
For the most part, no. No.
Oh, wow. So, okay, that's interesting. Because one of the things you worry about here, and I saw this during 2008, where we'd have job offers with people, and I literally would have people that were deciding, do I keep getting the benefits or do I start working? And that was certainly a challenge for our retail side of the business. Now in telecommuting, that was kind of a question that I had, because one of the things that I'm trying to think forward thinking, that number one, I think Zoom and all these other tools that allow us to work remotely, I've always been a big proponent of. Our company is mostly virtual. We do have a real office, but this is the first time we have physically forced every person that could to work remotely. One of the things I'm thinking that it's fundamentally going to change our relationship with office space, and change, I think, a lot of people's opinion on working remote and the benefits and disadvantages, all of that. I think we have a interesting opportunity, but places like commercial real estate for offices, I think that's a risk now in this new future with this new behavior that people are kind of becoming accustomed to. Did you see any of that since then, or are the offices still empty, or do you have any insight into that?
Yeah, well, there's a fair bit of telecommuting going on where it can be done in offices, things like that. How long it's going to last, I'm not sure. Like, again, yeah, I went through the whole SARS thing, and with SARS, I saw a very similar pattern. And like in the first 6 months, 1 year after that, you saw people being a lot more cautious. But by the time a year had passed, everybody had returned to the old habits. And
Okay, a year. So
yeah,
tell me about that crisis, because in the United States, it didn't feel, certainly does not feel the same.
yeah,
But was it more dramatic there than it was in the States?
yeah. It was like the thing with SARS. SARS was less contagious, but it was more lethal. So it was easier to control, but because China was the first one to be hit by it, they were the ones to have the largest impact as well. So and the paranoia from that certainly has carried over and had an impact here, whereas, as you say, it didn't have that impact in North America. So people don't have kind of that major paranoia of a previous similar disaster. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But so you're saying it took them about a year to kind of have a full back to the same behaviors and habits?
Yeah, about that.
Except for when did everybody start wearing masks? Was that during SARS?
No, that was long before, and that's not so much of a virus thing. That's just because of pollution.
Yeah.
People wear those, so they've been wearing masks for a long time. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You'll see
So
that throughout
a
Asia.
couple of takeaways I have so far is opportunities that exist is opportunities on pricing. If you have a vendor that you're buying from in China, you could probably negotiate and get some good deals.
Yeah.
Especially now, because I know we're not buying a lot of product right now, so I can see that. So I want to open it up to the audience, and these are entrepreneurs here in Nashville, Tennessee, that may have some questions for you. Anybody want to pipe in and ask a question, or if you're too shy, you can also send a message in the chat. Now, I've muted a lot of people. If you're talking on your cell phone, I've probably muted you, so you probably wouldn't even be able to, I don't know, unmute it. But if you're actually on the Zoom link, you can press the unmute button and talk.
Hey, Robert, this is Colton. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah, loud and clear.
All right. So I was talking with my pops this morning. I'm going to try and be articulate here. And this is the first group of entrepreneurs that I've kind of voiced this to. But I'm curious about China's response to this, knowing that folks have a different opinion, I think, of the way that culture functions. But to me, it seems like the more I think about this, we're going to hit a divide at some point, which is how long we stay isolated in the interests of protecting public health and those most at risk versus the overall risk of the of the country turning into a major depression because we haven't just bit the bullet and gone back to life as usual. I'm curious if you think, or from anybody you're talking to, if that concept is out there among anyone you're talking to. Are you guys tracking with me? Does that concept of tension make sense?
Kind of. I think let me respond to that and see if I'm answering your question. There are a number of differences. Obviously, decisions in North America, in the U.S., are driven. Company owners, business have a much louder, much more powerful voice in the government and the decisions it makes. China, not very much so. The businesses follow what the government says. So that would be one factor, very certainly, that's very different. Another is simply the fact that the Chinese are much more used to this. Again, practically every business owner, anybody over 35 years old, grew up in a China that was very poor, that didn't have. So what North Americans have grown up in as normal, they're comfortable. This is what they're comfortable with. This is the standard. For Chinese, this is all new. It's not enjoyable for them to take a step back, but psychologically, it's much easier for them to do that than it is in North America. So I think there will be, that the result is that both in Canada and the U.S. there's slower response from the government because they don't want to impact business, and there's also going to likely be more pressure for them to open up and relax restrictions quicker than was done in China.
Yeah, Colton, I kind of had the same viewpoint on that too, because when you really stop and think about it, we are all making a tremendous sacrifice for the old and weak. And we are literally completely changing society as we know it worldwide to protect those that are vulnerable. And it does make me think as well, it's like, is it worth the price that we are paying? And maybe it is. And, who's the one to judge? But I think we're all getting used to, and I think the little takeaway from John too is they've been like this before, and we are now experiencing a completely new world that is outside of our what's normal for us. So to see what I'm seeing, it's alarming, and it's interesting.
Yeah, and another thing to add to that is one of the things you talked about, that debate, that discussion, is it worth the sacrifice? Is this something we should be doing? Is actually a very North American thing. That's practically non-existent in China. In China, the government says this is what's good for us, this is what's good for the country, so this is what we do. You may have individuals who don't agree, but there's not really going to be that public debate discussion about that.
Yeah.
So there is a very different mentality that way.
Good question. Anyone else have anything they want to ask, John?
When you talk to people in China, are their faces as dour as everybody that I can see on this call is when you do FaceTime, or not FaceTime, whatever video chat you do?
Yes and no. There is, like, absolutely everybody's, I was telling Robert when he first talked to me about this, I do corporate consulting. I'm looking at a minimum 6 months of zero income right now. Businesses are definitely impacted. Same thing in China. Business owners there are being impacted as well. But I think the difference is they're in the recovery stage. So there's kind of looking forward for them is looking forward at more growth and recovery. Whereas for us looking forward right now, we're looking forward at further growth of the disease and further shutdown of the economy. So there is definitely, they're not super optimistic, like it's all over, we're back to things as normal, but there is definitely a difference in perspective there. Yeah.
And there's a big risk that this turns around again and they have to close up again to.
Yep, absolutely. That there's a lot of talk right now about a possibility of kind of a second wave of infections in China, which again, this is hitting social media in China massively, which is one of the reasons why people are still self-isolating.
Yeah. So it sounds like we're not completely out of the woods.
Yeah.
And what let's talk about some positive things that so far that I've seen as an outcome of this. I never talk on my phone. And I have literally called 4 or 5 people a day and had sometimes an hour or more conversation with friends and family from I hadn't talked to in forever, just seeking some comfort in someone's drama. I think sometimes we find comfort in understanding that other people are going through some shit. And what are some social positives that you saw? Is it this a very similar thing in China? Anything like that you could point to as a positive out of it?
In China, very definitely. I'm seeing this happening in North America as well, probably to a lesser degree, but still happening, is kind of the we're all in this together type of attitude. So things like for the wealthy or the shut in, you had like massive numbers of university students in China who actually went around like door to door checking on people, are you okay? Do you need anything? So elderly people living on their own they would go and get groceries for them. They'd have someone checking on them how their health is to see in case they get sick. There was quite a bit of that type of thing happening. So that way I'd say definitely yes. There's also one thing that quite a few Chinese companies have been doing is through the crisis, like after the holiday was over, but people still weren't returning to work, people are still staying home, quite a few of them were actually using social media or email or text messages or things like that to keep in touch with their clientele, that even though they weren't actively doing business, they were kind of still maintaining those social connections with them, so that when they get back, essentially companies that are doing that, when they get back to doing business, are probably going to do better than the companies that didn't do that, because the clients see them as caring. They've kept the relationship going.
Yeah. No, that's good advice for, I think, all of us to maintain those solid relationships. I did have another question from Bill. My connection is choppy. Sorry about that. What percentage of time do you think that we get the truth from our government compared to the Chinese government?
Honestly, I'd have to have 2 answers for that. Scientifically, if you look at the CDC and the info coming from them, I'd say it's quite rapid, quite up to date. As far as the information coming from politicians in leadership, let's say, not anywhere near so reliable.
What did you feel? And that's really a good question, because every day, in fact, I think while we were talking, I think President Trump came on and was talking a moment ago. Yeah. Was there that kind of daily updates going on in China, like with what was going on, giving the citizens some direction?
Oh, absolutely. Probably more comprehensively than in North America. At the peak of the crisis, it would probably been at an almost hourly rate. There were websites. There was a WeChat channel you could use. There was all sorts of different things that the government was using to keep people informed of what was happening. There's some question about how accurate the information was at times, but they were certainly very, very actively keeping them informed.
Mm-hmm. You know, this is a question for everybody here. Has anybody done a major pivot in their business in the last 7 days that they had no idea they had planned on doing? Anybody want to share anything like a pivot at all?
Hey, Robert, it's Angela. How are you?
Hey, good. Good to see you, Angela. Good to see your picture.
Hey. So one pivot is, a lot of business owners with larger companies, they pay anywhere from $6,000 to $10,000 a month for social media content agencies to post for them. And obviously, it's not a necessity, but to your point of being sure that you're staying in front of your clients, something that we have, I have a lot of friends in EO who shop their agencies, but they have no clue how to post. They have no clue. They don't even know their WordPress password to get into their blogging. They don't even know their Google Analytics ID. And of course, like being one of the things we do, I've had friends say, hey, can you help me out? Can you just show me to navigate? How do I post on my business Facebook? Like literally things that I never thought would come out of it. And so we've been telling some clients that have those larger agencies that aren't paying for that service right now, that if they need help just understanding the basics of navigating their website, how to put a coronavirus update on there, how to get it on the back end of WordPress. I have filled my day with 8 to 10 hours of Zoom meetings showing people how to do that. And it really shows me a huge need for busy entrepreneurs to understand what they're paying for. And even yesterday, 2 different friends of mine found out how their marketing agency was screwing them. And normally I wouldn't say it like that, but I know you all. So yeah, so that's just one way that we have pivoted, where I'm thinking we haven't started offering it really as a service, but it's something I'm definitely considering in the future, because I do think people for about a year, like you guys are saying, they're not just going to be shelling out 10 grand every month just to do blog posts and post on social media. So that's one.
Hey,
I do
thanks.
have one question.
Thanks, Angela. That's awesome. Did someone say they had a question?
It was just me, Angela. And you may not be able to speak to this, but so I have a client in Mexico, in Cabo specifically, and they're telling me, it's not affecting Cabo, it's warm there, and they want me to fly there tomorrow to do a week of consulting for a boutique hotel, some training. And I'm like, I don't know. Like, I guess Trump hasn't grounded planes to Mexico. But I know that Robert, your friend, mentioned like he's a consultant too. Like, would you go to Cabo and work for a week? I'm just wondering. I'm looking for opinions. I don't know if I should go or not.
Well, my answer to that would be no, because pretty much I pretty much predict what you're going to see is that area right now doesn't have a lot of infections. In 2 weeks,
Right.
You're going to see a massive flare up there because people are taking that attitude.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
Now, I had heard this, and this is probably a complete another non-truth, and that is that there's been cases of people contracting this, getting well, getting over it, and then weeks later catching it again. Is that a false thing? Because
that's something I haven't seen it confirmed anywhere. It's one of those kind of rumors that's spreading around. I haven't seen anything where that's been confirmed by scientists. Yeah.
Okay.
So I think I'd keep it in the back of mind, but it wouldn't be something I consider as a major.
Oh, it looks like U.S.-Mexico border has been shut down for non-essential as of today. Sorry about that, Angela.
Okay. It's all good. I think my mother would strangle me if I did get on a plane tomorrow, but I'm not going to lie. I was considering it. I was.
I think I have another question for Vicky Hill. This is something I'm concerned about with. I kind of am guessing I know what the answer is, but did China experience the negative aspects of human behavior through the course of the crisis, such as people taking advantage, looting, fighting over toilet paper kind of thing?
That type of thing, not so much. Again, because the government had very strict control on it. Looting, no. Looting, I've never seen really happen as a phenomenon in China. It's just not a cultural thing. People stocking up on things to a certain degree, but again, the government put very strict regulations in place about that to prevent that price gouging as well. Where you did see it more, there were quite a few stories that floated around China about individuals who did, but this was kind of like social shaming, which worked very effectively. Like right at the beginning, there were several stories. There was a woman who knew that she was infected with the coronavirus and was afraid of getting quarantined, because there you're not quarantined at home, you'd be quarantined in a hospital. She didn't want that. So she took meds to lower her body temperature and then hopped on a plane to go to Europe. And after she arrived in Europe, she put a post on WeChat about how smart she was. And the reaction was massively negative. This went viral across the country. She ended up facing criminal charges in both China and the country she'd gone to. I forget which one it was. Then you had another one, and this one was just appalling. But a Chinese family that was going was traveling overseas, father, mother, and 2 kids. And when they got to the hospital, the 2 kids had fevers, so wouldn't be allowed on the flight. So the parents hopped on the flight and left the kids there, and after they arrived in the target country, phoned up relatives to go and pick the kids up. So there was selfish behavior like that, but every time it happened, there was massive social shaming about it in China. These people were vilified. It went viral. So that provided very significant social pressure for other people not to do that type of thing.
Yeah, and one of the things I've noticed personally is this normalcy bias that keeps creeping up. Well, I'll wake up and I'm just mentally in my routine, and I'll think I'm going to leave the house, or I'll tell someone, yeah, I'll meet you at so-and-so later. And then I have to call them back and be like, yeah, why did I say that? I just forgot. Like literally, and this idea of social shaming is kind of interesting, because there's a lot of people that I'm seeing, including my dad. I think all of us, if probably, and if you haven't, we all need to have that conversation with our parents. And I had to fight that. My dad is, super conservative, and I had to almost try to convince him that this is a real threat for him and my mom to pay attention to this. And because I manage my dad's money for him, I see him making charges, and he's leaving the house. He's going to stores, and that getting people to be more responsible. I think what I'm kind of taking away from some of this is the Chinese government, because of the way they rule, were able to probably slow the progression at a much more rapid pace than I think our country is prepared for.
Yeah.
And just the nature of a typical American. I mean, I fly 4 or 5 times a month, and see lots of people and do those kind of things. So I could see that potentially this could get a lot scarier in terms of infection rates here in the United States than it would be over there.
Yeah.
Because of that.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Like, just one simple example of the difference: shutting down Disneyland. Now, Disney in Florida have closed now, but in North America, that's a corporate decision made by the business. In China, that was a government decision. It was just, you are shutting down. That's
yeah. All right, we're coming up to the end. Is there any last question anybody wants to ask before we go on? Hey, John,
I would like to add one more thing, and
Sure.
This is for, like you were asking before, about positive perspectives on this. In talking with my friends back in China, I'm talking both with expatriates and with Chinese there. And I am seeing one major difference in their perspective on business. Westerners are mostly focused more on right now, the problems they're going to have, how are they going to get through it, everything like that. The Chinese have much more of a perspective of, yes, there are problems right now, but for the companies that survive this and are prepared, are ready to pounce once the crisis is over, those are the companies that are going to have the biggest opportunities. And that's what they're really focusing on more is, yeah, we need to survive this, but it's more not just a question of surviving this. It's a question of, like, there are going to be all sorts of companies that when this crisis is over no longer exist. There's going to be big swaths of market that are now wide open. How well positioned are you to be able to step in and take advantage of that once the crisis is over? And there could be some big opportunities there on that side. And most of the Chinese business owners I'm talking to are taking much more of that perspective.
John, man, I really appreciate your time today and your expertise and your thoughts and some of the wisdom that you've shared with us today. If someone needed to reach out to you, how would one reach out to you?
I'll put my my email in the text area there. My website is languageofculture.net, all one word.
Okay.
That would probably be the best way to contact me by email there. Yeah.
Yeah, and if you guys are watching me right now, his short bio and his information was inside the EO link, also with his LinkedIn profile. If you guys choose to reach out to him and he just put his email address in that. So I think if you were looking to do business in China or trying to find some relationships, I think John could be a good resource for you if you didn't have one already. So John, thanks again. Thanks, EO. You guys stay safe. We're going to get through this together, and we're going to put our minds together, and we're going to think logically and innovatively, and together, if we share enough, we're going to get through this together. Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much, Robert. Nice to meet everyone.
Bye, all.